by roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Boswell. Commissioner Hazelton.
Here.
Commissioner Godek.
Here.
Commissioner Gaddis.
Here.
Commissioner Behrendt.
Here.
Commissioner Lamb.
Here.
And Secretary Hensley.
Here. Okay. Next, we'll do a salute to the flag. Commissioner Gaddis, would you mind leading us in the salute to the flag?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Looks like Commissioner Boswell has joined us. Is that everybody? Okay. Okay. Next, we'll go on to approve the order of the agenda. I did have a request from staff to move item L1, the accessory structure. Oh, no, I'm sorry. To move item L1, the design guidelines discussion before the public hearing on accessory structures. If there's any other commissioners that want to move anything else in the agenda, otherwise I'll entertain a motion to approve the order of the agenda, moving item L1 before item J1. Is that right, Director Forbes? Okay.
That's correct. Thank you.
Make that motion. Motion to approve the order of the agenda, moving item L1 with J1.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Okay, don't see any hands up, so I'll roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Boswell.
Yes.
Commissioner Hazelton.
Yes.
Commissioner Godek.
Yes.
Commissioner Gaddis.
Yes.
Commissioner Behrendt.
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb.
Yes.
And Secretary Hensley.
I'll also vote yes, thank you. Okay, next we are moving on to the blue folder item. Blue folder items are additional backup material or administrative reports or public comments received after the printing and distribution of the agenda packet for receive and file. Oh,
Yes.
that comes later, doesn't it?
Yeah, you did have I think some non-agenda comment blue folder items were distributed this afternoon, as well as I believe we sent some other items out yesterday for the items on the agenda. So if there's a motion to receive and file those.
Motion to receive and file.
I second.
Okay.
Roll call vote. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Chair. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Motion to receive and file the blue folder items. Do you want me to call Lena, or do you want to do it?
I can. It's fine. I can do it. That's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Boswell.
Yes. Yes.
Commissioner Hazelton.
Yes.
Commissioner Godek.
Yes.
Commissioner Gaddis.
Yes.
Commissioner Behrendt.
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb.
Yes.
And Secretary Hensley.
Yes. Okay, so thank you for that. So next we'll move on to the consent calendar. The consent calendar is business items except those formally noticed for public hearing or those pulled for discussion or assigned to the consent calendar. The commission members may request any consent calendar items be removed, discussed, and acted upon separately. Items removed from the consent calendar will be taken up under the excluded consent calendar section below. Those items remaining on the consent calendar will be approved in one motion. I'll call on anyone wishing to address the commission on any of the consent calendar items on the agenda, which has not been pulled by the commission for discussion. Are there any e-comments or public comments on the consent calendar?
There are no e-comments for consent calendar. No one has signed up to speak on any items on the consent calendar.
Okay. Are there any commissioners who'd like to pull any items? We have 3 items on the consent calendar tonight. Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion to approve the consent calendar.
I second.
have a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar item. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Boswell,
Aye.
Commissioner Hazelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Godek,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaddis,
Yes.
Commissioner Barrett,
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb,
Yes.
and Secretary Hensley.
Yes. Okay. Nothing was excluded from the consent calendar. Now we'll move on to public participation on non-agenda items. This section is intended to provide the members of the public with an opportunity to comment on any subject that does not appear on this agenda tonight for action. Each speaker will be afforded 3 minutes to address the commission, and each speaker will be permitted only to speak once. Do we have any e-comments or public members who wish to address the commission on non-agenda items?
Let me see. We have some hands raised, so let me check and see. Let me see here. Manuel George, Manny, did you wish to address on non-agenda items?
The non-agenda items, I believe I wanted to speak on the open usable space as well as the Redondo guidelines.
Okay, so the guidelines, that is on the agenda. So we'll take public comment when we get to that item for that.
Understood. Yeah, I'll sign off.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and then there's one more. So Soela, did you want to address on non-agenda items?
I'm so sorry. I just want to know when you get to the public, then I can talk. Sorry about that.
Oh, okay, for the residential design guidelines?
For the Redondo Beach, yeah, for the downzoning and all that. When we get there.
Okay, one moment.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so no, there's no non-agenda speakers. Sure.
Okay. Okay, moving on. Next is receive and file of public written comments on non-agenda items. Did we have those this month?
Yeah, you did, yes. So those were part of the agenda packet as well.
Okay, so do we need a motion to receive and file those?
Yes, let's go ahead and do that, please.
Motion to
Okay, we have a motion to receive and file the public written comments on non-agenda items.
Second.
We have a second. I think those are the ones from Mr. Nelson. Is that right? That were in the agenda
Yes,
packet?
yes, and I think there was one other person as well.
Okay. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to receive and file public written comments on non-agenda items. To get another roll call vote.
Commissioner Boswell,
Yes.
Commissioner Hazelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Godek,
Yes.
Commissioner Gaddis,
yes.
Commissioner Barrett,
Yes.
Commissioner Lamb,
Yes.
and Secretary Hensley.
I will also vote yes. Okay. Thank you. So next is the ex parte communication. Do we want to do this now or before the public hearing? Since we moved the discussion item first, we can do it now, but I just like to.
We should probably just go ahead and do it now since we're at that section.
Okay.
This would be
All right.
for the continued public hearing item.
Yep. So next is the ex parte communication disclosures. And again, this is just for public hearing. So tonight's item J1 for consideration of amendments to the Redondo Beach Code on accessory structures. So this section is intended to allow the opportunity to reveal any disclosure or ex parte communication about the public hearing. So again, J1 is public hearing tonight. Let's see if the commissioners have any ex parte communication. Okay, I'll ask. Commissioner Barrett, do you have any ex parte communication on the public hearing for tonight?
I do.
Okay.
Redondo Beach City staff, members of the Redondo Beach community, council members Zane Obaji Jr., council member Laura MD, council member Christian Horvath, council member Todd Lowenstein, Mayor Bill Brand, Commissioner Gaddis. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Boswell, you have ex parte communication on the public hearing item?
I have no ex parte communications to report.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Geddes?
Yes, spoke with members of the public, Commissioner Barron and Commissioner Lamb.
Thank you. And Commissioner Godek?
None, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hazeltine?
I spoke with Mayor Bill Brand, Councilperson Abaji, the public, Matthew Hensley, Commissioner Matthew Hensley, and I don't think I actually spoke with Sheila Lamb about this particular topic, but Sheila Lamb maybe? Sheila, I don't think we talked about this topic.
That's correct. That's correct.
In there though, anyway. I don't know. It was after the last meeting, so I included you.
Right,
Okay.
right.
That's clear for the. So that was yes, there was expedited communication, or no, there was not expedited communication
No, we
on
didn't.
this particular public
No, we
hearing
didn't
item.
talk about this.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lamb?
So I spoke with Commissioner Gaddis, and I spoke with Commissioner Hensley, but not since the first meeting. So since our, Commissioner Hensley and I have talked about the Brown Act and whether or not the extension of where the Brown Act falls on certain times and certain relationships. So at this point in time, I'm going to clearly state that I have spoken about this issue for this period of time with Commissioner Gaddis. And hopefully that's clear. I have spoken, I put in a call to our city attorney, and I have not received, and that was 2-3 weeks ago, and have not received a call back. So thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, and myself, I spoke to staff, the public, Commissioner Lamb, but before the public hearing, and then Commissioner Hazeltine as well. So, okay, that was a lot to get through. Okay, but again, we're not going to do the public hearing item first. We moved item L1 before the public hearing, so we'll move on to item L1, which is a discussion and possible action on the update to the city's residential design guidelines. And Director Forbes.
Great, thank you so much. Commissioners, we have the city's consultant, CityWorks Design, with us tonight, and their team. This is an item that the City Council, when I first started, the City Council was interested in seeing that the residential design guidelines were implemented, but also saw that there were some gaps and issues with the existing residential design guidelines. So they had done a strategic planning item to update the residential design guidelines. And we were able to get grant funding to do that update. And we went through an RFP process. Unfortunately, when we first went through the RFP process, so many of the consultants that would do this kind of work were also doing a lot of housing elements. So that we didn't have a lot of takers for this particular project because so many, there was such a set deadline for all municipalities for the housing element that that we weren't getting we weren't getting any proposals. So we had reached out. We were at one of the firms that we had sent it to was CityWorks, and I think it wasn't just the issue of the housing elements. It was also an issue of timing with COVID because a lot of offices were shut, offices were open. So it was just an uncertainty of when projects were going to move forward. So when we finally reached back out to a few different firms, Lisa Padilla from CityWorks, she was definitely interested. It was, things were settling out, having an expectation of what the timeline was. And the city council approved her contract this summer. And we've been doing a lot of background work. That was the initial work of, looking at what the design guidelines are, doing a bus tour of the city with staff to see what are some of the issues. And what city council's interest was, the first thing is updating it so we're also including the R1A zone. That's not currently included in the zoning, in the residential design guidelines. And then also addressing a lot of the issues. They asked that we address a lot of the issues that seem to come up regularly as concerns, whether it's from actual applicants or from residents who are complaining about different projects coming in, that perhaps they wanted to see something a little more in line with their neighborhood. So with that, we are here tonight. This is our initial set of meetings. We are having we had a meeting with the focus group of designers, architects to get some of their feedback, seeing what are some of the issues for implementing what's out there for residential design guidelines. We're going to have a community meeting on January 10th, where we're going to hear from the public. And again, that's more of that, what has or hasn't worked for certain applicants, and then as well, what has or hasn't worked for their neighbors. And then for tonight, we really wanted to get the feedback from the planning commissioners on kind of what's the bigger picture vision for the community and addressing some of those particular issues that we have heard from the public on over the years. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa. She's going to do a presentation and then invite the conversation to happen after that presentation. If you have questions throughout, if you're not understanding something that we're going over, just let us know. But the bigger conversation will come after the presentation. With that, I turn it over to Lisa Padilla.
Thank you, Brandy. And I want to introduce my colleagues. I'm here tonight with Liz Barrell. Liz is a principal planner consulting to CityWorks Design. She brings great experience, including a number of years in working with Santa Monica, City of Santa Monica. And Michael Nahara is a colleague who's worked with me for a number of years now, and he's an urban designer. I'm an architect and planner and started my firm about 15 years ago after working in a large practice, national-based practice on a number of projects. But our focus has been urban design, guidelines for different cities in Southern California. So thank you, commissioners, for your time tonight. Michael, if you can go ahead and share screen, Liz will be presenting the first few slides, and then I'll pick up the second half. And as Brandy said, please feel free to interrupt with questions or comments. Thank you. Next.
Okay, hi. Good evening, planning commissioners. It's nice to be with you this evening. I wasn't sure actually if Brandy didn't want to give some of this overview of why we're updating our standards. Maybe this slide is what she pretty much just said anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. So as I mentioned, the initiative for updating our residential design guidelines came from the city council. They were already interested in doing that. That being said, there has been state legislation that's been adopted that requires design guidelines and design standards to be objective. SB 330 is one. I think that Liz will be going over some of the other regulations that have that requirement. Now, ours were grandfathered in. However, if we want to make any changes to it, now it needs to be updated to be objective. And it's really, in addition to just doing it because the state wants you to have objective standards, it's important for us. What we've discovered is there's a lot of language in our existing residential design guidelines that says encourages or discourages, highly discourages. And it, that's all very subjective. And there ends up being a lot of back and forth with designers on, trying to get something that falls within what works for designing and as well what seems to meet the code. But then it ends up being very subjective. And we forwarded along the interpretation we did on garages because that became such a concern and a conflict because of in some areas it's very specific and required. In some areas it's heavily discouraged to have a front facing garage. And so we ended up doing a several page interpretation just so that the designers would have an idea of where we're going to land and what we're going to require. So we don't want to have to keep doing interpretations, rather just have the objective design standards.
Okay. So I think we can go to the next slide. I think we've covered all this, and then I'll take that from here. Thank you, Brandy.
Sure.
Okay, so as you know, before we get into all the specifics of what we're trying to do in the project, we want to give you some context. And as you know, California has a housing shortage, and increasingly at the state level, the response has been to pass this legislation that reduces the ability of cities to apply discretionary processes for residential development. So Redondo Beach, as Brandy noted, has long relied on guidelines and is now recognizing the need to update these objective standards to meet the state's requirements and support cities' design and compatibility goals in this changing context. So as you can see on this slide, the state laws have been coming forward for the last 5 years, and we expect that there probably will be more of them coming in 2022. So the LEAP grant that Brandy referenced earlier is one way that the state has extended financial aid to cities to support that work, and that work that needs to be done to change those processes and introduce those objective standards. Next slide. So the end game for this process is to replace the 2003 guidelines with new standards that maintain the design intent and incorporate the R1A district, which is not covered in the guidelines. The standards will be adopted in a manner that clarifies what is required versus what is suggested or recommended. The input from the commission and the community is critical in getting this right so that the future permitting process can work smoothly and successfully. Next slide. Over the coming months, this input process will involve drafting standards and comparing them with projects to test whether they do indeed result in the community's desired outcomes, and then refining them to get them right. So today is just the first step, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts to guide our work. So what is meant by objective standard? The state describes them as standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official before submittal. So what that means in a nutshell is that the goal is to be very straightforward and clear so that both sides understand the same thing when they look at a set of plans together. So like the guidelines, the objective standards will aim to result in new homes and remodels that fit well into Redondo Beach and then maintain the character that has defined the city even as it has evolved over the years. Additionally, the standards will address the challenges that staff has had to review projects in R1A for compatibility without having standards or guidelines specially crafted for this district. So next slide, many residential projects in Redondo Beach are processed administratively. In other words, they do not require review by the Planning Commission. So these are projects that you wouldn't see, but they're projects that affect the residential districts a lot. The code includes some certain basic development standards, but as you can see here, it authorizes the design guidelines by requiring projects to be consistent with their intent. So in an administrative project, this puts the responsibility on staff to determine whether a project is consistent. When a project does come to the Planning Commission for your design review and approval, then the determination authority rests with the Commission, but in either case, the same guidelines are considered. Now, the new standards will allow staff to replace the interpretation of intent with something more objective. So we plan to propose these standards with illustrations so that staff and applicants can sit across the counter or across the Zoom screen with a clear mutual understanding of the requirements. In almost all cases, both sides should be able to come to the same conclusion about whether the plans they are looking at comply with the city's requirements because the standards are verifiable and measurable, an important term from the state. So a standard is distinguished from a guideline by the terminology that's used. So standards are identifiable by the words shall or must, whereas guidelines use should or may. For example, it should be easy to show on a set of plans that the entire second floor is set back from the front building line by a minimum of 10 feet, or that it includes 40 square feet of planted area. In contrast, if the planner needs to determine that the proposed home reflects the neighborhood character or the intent of the guidelines for neighborhood character, it's possible that a planner's understanding may differ from that of the applicant or even that of another planner. So that determination brings in subjectivity, which is what we're trying now to avoid. Another type of guideline example in the second bullet is the use of the word may. So this language is suggestive. So if it is important to have certain features in a project, then it should be a standard and not permitted with the word may. If they're suggested through guidelines, that's fine, but then the applicant cannot be made to include them in the project. So there's a number of different ways of incorporating requirements through standards. One of the easiest, simplest is the true or false. So for example, do the plans include building entrances from the street? Yes or no? Easy. Counts and measurements are also straightforward. So do the plans include 40 square feet of landscaping, for example? Also easy to determine. Ratios and calculations are a little more complicated, but those can be demonstrated by including them on the plans in the information section of the cover page or in an application form that asks for that information. So we're also exploring situations in which maybe using what's called a scorecard or a point system could make sense. For example, in providing landscaping. So rather than being prescriptive by saying how many trees and shrubs to use, the point system would allow flexibility as long as a minimum number of points are achieved. So in this example, you can see that large trees have been assigned a high number of points, which indicates that they are very desirable. But the applicant may choose to install more trees, smaller trees to comply. So this gives flexibility and is easily measurable and has been successful in other jurisdictions. Performance measures are sometimes a bit trickier, but a good way to go for things like, for instance, the Cal Green, achieving the Cal Green tier level, which a professional can demonstrate compliance with the performance standards. Minimizing water usage is often expressed as a performance standards, and this can also be objectively determined if there are sufficient definitions for guidance. So in summary, the goal of this project is to create objective standards that use clear language and avoid technical terms to the extent possible, defining those terms when they are unavoidable. The standards should be intuitive to look up and organized to be easily found. And the best examples we know of use tables, lists, graphics, and things that most people are able to understand and digest easily. I'm also very fond of cross-referencing because with the advent of online codes it's very easy to cross-reference and group together parts of the code that are not actually in the same place. So that will also be part of what we hope to produce when we have a draft to propose for you of the new standards. So that concludes my section on the project overview, and I'll hand it over to Lisa to get into the design issues, which are really at the heart of this project. All right.
Thank you, Liz. So maybe I'll stop for 1 second. Were there any questions, or is it okay if I go on to this second half is really focused on Redondo Beach and really seeding the conversation for the commissioners tonight. So unless there are any hands or anything, I will go ahead and go on. So next slide, Michael. So as mentioned, we're expecting that a lot of the change in the objective design standards will actually be focused on the single family residential zones. And I'm sure the commissioners are very familiar with the current zoning map and some of the changes in your newer land use plan. Next. I think one important aspect of this that the team has talked about is the importance of understanding the neighborhood character in these very unique districts that Redondo Beach has as part of its history and what makes the city really unique. If we go to the next slide, neighborhood character, though, is really conveyed through a series of elements that when they really are taken as a whole, they kind of all add up to a sense of neighborhood character. So these different architectural aspects are a series of topics that we know we'll need to address in the objective residential design standards. I think we're interested in hearing from the commissioners tonight. Are there other topics that are missing? We're going to go through a few of these just to kind of warm up, but we are curious if there are topics that you would like to see included when the draft is developed. Or if you have some observations and experience on some of these topics you'd like to share. So we'll go through each of these really quickly. And again, just to kind of give you some food for thought for the conversation that follows. Next. So lot design and setbacks has a lot to do with how projects are perceived from the street or from a neighbor's property. This is really how you site buildings on the site and how they're set back. Next. Roof types are a really important aspect because they probably are one of the biggest elements within a project that convey the style of the project. They also have real implications related to maximum heights and how the massing of a structure appears given the maximum heights that are set. You can kind of get that sense from just these sketches here. Next. We're hoping to hear from the commissioners tonight about roof decks. You know, these have become really popular during the pandemic as we're really encouraged by friends and family to entertain outside. And especially in Redondo Beach because views to the ocean are so important from some of the parcels in the city. So we expect that to be an important topic. Mezzanines and cantilevers from our bus tour seem to be an important aspect that has brought a lot of change in neighborhoods. So we're hoping to hear more tonight with your thoughts on that. So this is kind of just to show a cartoon of those differences, the mezzanines in relation to the one story, and also the cantilever, what we're calling the cantilever, which is to maximize sort of what you're building on a site. A lot of projects are bringing them over the driveway and going out to the maximum setback. Next. So, and just some photographic examples. The top one is an example of a recent project that took advantage of the bonuses or applied the bonuses for a mezzanine and an FAR next to a landmark home. The lower one is a single family residence next to a smaller traditional home in the upper avenues. Next. So with the mezzanines, there are kind of different ways that they're being implemented. One is they are either started as open or they're later enclosed or they're done as a third floor, which the building code currently allows. So that sketch on the left is showing an example which if it's pushed more towards the front of a property or, to the street, has impacts on what that massing looks like, or if it's pushed to a side yard and a neighboring property. The middle one is really, you can have mezzanines that are partially enclosed, which is really close to the original definition of mezzanines, within a structure, like within a second floor. And then the last one is an enclosed one that could be set back from the street. If you said to the left of that sketch was the street frontage, there's ways you can handle the mezzanine. So we think that it may be important to specify for objective evaluation where the mezzanines are allowed within a parcel. Next. So just some additional sketches on the mezzanine and cantilevers. I think I'll kind of go on to the next one because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to hear from the commissioners tonight. Some examples of two-story, just in comparison, obviously houses without mezzanines. Next. And then the second set of topics for the last few slides are really about how residential projects meet the street and the neighboring structures. Next. So that includes the topics of step back and transitions. And is there any experience in terms of how those have been executed in projects recently? And then garage and habitable space, which is really applicable for the projects in your hillside sites. Next. Landscape and planning is a really important aspect for residential projects we plan to address. Next. And then driveway and parking layout. We know this is a very important topic for the city of Redondo Beach, whether the driveways are accessible from the front of the street, next, or whether they are historically or traditionally accessed from the alleys, which is the case on a lot of parcels. And do we want to, that's a question, do we want to continue to have that access encouraged from the alley versus having breaks occur on the residential street frontage? Next. I think this is one of the last slides. This is to say that because of the LEAP grant requires that ADUs are addressed in the objective residential design standards, the regulations we don't expect to be different than what is currently allowed, but it does need to be included to comply with the grant. Next. I think Brandy went through a lot of the highlights of this, but getting input is really key for our team. Monday, we had a really productive focus group where we got to hear from the design community what some of the challenges are that they've been facing and some topics they're very interested in having the guidelines addressed. And then in January, the community workshop, and then an online survey available to any resident in the city or the design community will be available soon. And we're hoping to get a lot of input from a wide range of people through the survey. And that's really it. So I think we're really hoping to hear from the commissioners. Any thoughts? These discussion topics are just to give you some potential ideas of some things the team is really interested in hearing about, but we are open to whatever aspects or questions you have. So with that, I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation. Certainly a lot to consider there. So I don't see any hands up, so maybe I'll start then. I have a couple questions. I know we talked about single family residential and R1 and R1A. These design guidelines that we're going to talk about cover R2 and R3 as well?
Brandy, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I will. Yes, they do. And our current residential design guidelines have both single family and multifamily design guidelines in them. We expect to have the same, maybe not that the design guidelines are going to be laid out the same, but we do expect it to cover the same zones so that it is addressing that. And as an application comes, when those applications do come before you, where it is that multifamily, that is something that we've included in the administrative report is how it's, met the residential design guidelines.
Okay, great. All right, a couple of hands up. Commissioner Lamb or Hazelton? I didn't see who was first. Maybe Commissioner Lamb, were you first?
It actually doesn't matter, but
it doesn't matter.
Okay. So I have a lot of comments and a lot of questions. The first comment is in regards to the survey. Just a reminder that linking, make sure that the front page of the Redondo Beach city website has the link there. Sometimes there's been a reliance on emails, and yet the front page of the web of the city website has no information at all. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. Front page of a city website. Some of the concerns I think that I've heard over the years and currently is about the mass bulk height of new dwellings. And you probably have seen, you've likely seen a variety of these dwelling units that are not, and I think you showed pictures, that there's little link between one, a newer one and an older one. And how do we, it seems to me that it's important to remedy that. However, I think it's most important in certain sections of the community, and I think you've highlighted that. I think it's in your presentation. Certain areas, and I believe certain areas already have separate guidelines, design guidelines just for them, and the areas that you pointed out, I think are important, but also there are other areas. I'm thinking, Brandy, of the Johnson Triangle. That seems to be an area where people really have gelled around each other and have a common theme. So that's, again, the mass, bulk, and height and compatibility issues, I think, are really important. A compatibility matrix, I think, would be very helpful. Okay, number two, how did the guidelines intersect with the Redondo Beach Climate Action Plan? So how do you integrate, or do you, right? Do they integrate? And I guess that's a question. Do they integrate, and or how can they be integrated? So I don't have any extended comment on that. Refining the standards. How will you test the draft standards? And I don't know if you want to answer that now. I've got just one more question. Please explain how you would use objective standards to what you say, maintain overall community character. And how would you describe Redondo Beach community character in an objective manner? And I'm saying that because, for example, if you compare Redondo Beach with Palos Verdes or even Manhattan Beach, that have had long-standing, very strict standards, right? You don't see, whereas Redondo Beach has been sort of the Wild West of, and really appreciated a kind of iconoclast, or maybe that's not the quite the right word, but a kind of mixture, right? A mixture of anything goes. So how do you, I'm in complete agreement with you about objective standards and appreciating different areas. I would certainly want to see those to be want to encourage you in that direction. But how would you maintain the overall a community character using objective standards. And that concludes my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Land. Chair Hensley, is it okay if I answer some of those now, or would you prefer we heard from all the commissioners who have comments?
I think it's probably best to go ahead and answer. That way, if other commissioners have the same question, then we can just deal with it as they come up.
Okay, and maybe it's more a comment to say, I think you've hit the difficult nail on the head for us as a consulting team, the challenges that are before us with writing these objective design guidelines for sure. The mass bulk and height, we think, is going to be one of the most challenging topics to resolve, of which you'll be seeing a draft of this section and other sections next year. The testing, we would expect we would look at some prototypical parcel sizes and some kind of testing of massing and what might result with certain standards that if they are different from what is out there today. And how do we establish objective ones, going back to Liz's half? I mean, that is the challenge. There's really not a lot of examples of this type of guideline. It's new across the state of California. The maintaining of community character is a very central question, I think, for the city and the residents of the city, because I think that word eclectic is definitely at the heart of a number of neighborhoods because they were cohesive probably up through the early post-war years. And then in the last 10 to 20 with development pressure and the price of real estate and need for more space, it really changed the landscape for what families need and how developers, look at opportunities in different parcels. So it's sort of like, do we allow that? Does that continue? Is that what residents and the commission would like to see? Or do you want it to be different? And that's a fundamental question that isn't the consulting team to answer. I think it's ours to follow the lead that we're hearing from a consensus point of view of where the city wants to go. And neighborhoods may be different in that way, but there's definitely a lot of eclectic development. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and if I may, the question on that, how do you use those objective standards? That's where what do you want? How do you want to define mezzanines? Right now, our regulations refer to the building codes on what is a mezzanine and how it's defined. Well, every 3 years, the building codes are updated. So in 2019, they were updated. Previously, they were required to be open to the room below. In 2019, that was changed. So it doesn't have to have that opening to the floor below. So the concern is now it really has become that third floor. Now maybe it's a limited size, but it's still a concern that people say, oh, I just saw this house went up as 3 stories. Well, technically, it falls under the definition of mezzanine. But, in all practicality, it's a third floor. So, those are the things that, do you define mezzanine so that it's continual and not something that just changes based on a building code, but rather is something that you want to define so that keeps that character, it keeps what you're looking for. Do you have mezzanines? Do they require a certain setback from the typical setback of the rest of the structure? The roof types, maybe it might, a flat roof all the way to the setback versus, a different type of roof that might have a slope to it can feel a little bit different to the neighboring property. So those are the things that where we went through some of the issues that have come up, the mezzanines, the roof types. And then I think then the garages is another one. It's just such an unusual thing because there's the guidelines actually recommend a side-facing garage over a front-facing garage. Yet I don't know that creates anything better. So So it's different things like that that can help you figure out how you want to, what are the issues or the character that you want to keep.
I'd just like a follow-up quick question to Lisa on that. Will the survey, Lisa, you mentioned that the community character question is something for Redondo to resolve, but will you be looking to bring out some of that information from your survey?
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a specific question in our survey because it's kind of what is the future of the city or your community question. We also have other specific ones on some of the topics that you've mentioned and that other commissioners may raise. And we're hoping everybody has the time to take, it's probably 20 questions right now, plus or minus. We're still editing a little bit, but we're hoping to extract a lot of good input from the survey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. One question quickly for Director Forbes. Are the comments of the commissioners being kind of written down in notes, or are we going to make some sort of kind of informal vote on what we agree on, or what exactly are you guys looking for feedback?
I think that if you have certain recommendations, it would be good for you as a group to say, is there any, and it doesn't have to be a formal vote on it, but just, it's coming from the commission. It would be, does anybody have any objections to that? And if so, what is, what's the reason of the objection? Because maybe it's something that's still aligned, but not, maybe they have something additional to add. But we're taking the notes. We have, this is a recorded video, so we can come back and revisit that. And then if any of the commissioners want to send anything, any comments via email, just keep in mind it's only going to be you as an individual commissioner. It's not going to be something because, the other commissioners wouldn't have necessarily weighed in on it. But it is something that, we understand that you all are working with this on a regular basis. And so your thoughts and questions or concerns are something that we want to hear about.
Great. Commissioner Hazeltine?
Yeah, hi. That was a great presentation. Thank you. Let's see, the curb cuts and driveways. When we're talking about the avenues, for example, the west of Pacific Coast Highway is all alleyway. They all have an alley behind. So we wouldn't really be considering a driveway on those particular streets, right? That's just like for sure not going to happen.
We typically wouldn't advise it because it's such a key part of the neighborhood character unless we heard an overwhelming
okay,
comment, but I wouldn't expect that would be the case.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that, if there is an alleyway behind a home, that we take advantage of having the garage on the backside without a curb cut or driveway in the front. And I know that on the east side, Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, it's kind of like there are some alleys, but not all the homes have alleys.
That's correct. And, we ended up having, there's definitely been a turnover in the Planning Commission, but just so you're aware, not quite 2 years ago, it was right before COVID hit, we actually had an appeal of a decision I made on the east side of PCH in the avenues, where the applicant wanted to do a front-facing garage, and the property itself, there was nothing unusual to the property. The slope wasn't, there was no slope differential, because sometimes, things like that are going to be a hindrance from that. And they had access, actually, I want to say it was a street access, but it was a rear garage. And they had the ability to access from the alleyway. And they said, no, we really want to have this house. And they appealed my decision. And the Planning Commission said, no, we agree. We're really glad that you're implementing the residential design guidelines. And, we looked at in that neighborhood how many other structures had that front facing garage. And the difference between that and just a driveway access to a rear garage, is that that is the majority of what's, facing the street and not having eyes on the street. So if you look at the interpretation, there's, a little bit of look, there's something unusual. And if it's not in the area that's required, the one that you'd mentioned previously, where it's on the west side, it's we definitely had, well, there are other things you're going to have to do and you must comply with if that's the case, but it's still an interpretation. So it's good to hear, some of that feedback, but if the preference is to have that alley access, what would be the things that you, if they were choosing to do something different or needed to do something different, what are some of the other things that you would want to have to offset that?
I think that's where we would have a shall. I think having grown up on the lower avenues, that is a huge part of the character of that neighborhood. And I think that having a driveway in the front, I was on Avenue B, there might have been one, and I'm not even sure why that ever happened. I just don't see the need for it. There's already rear access. The garages are in the back, which makes for a really nice neighborhood feel. And I also on the east side, I don't have all of those memorized, but I'm assuming most of those do have alleys also. And I think that is the same. It's really, really important that we make that a shall. And I understand if there's a hill, there might be an issue, but still, if you have alley access, we should be using the back side of it. Then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the floor area ratio, and this kind of goes along with what Commissioner Lamb was saying. When I look at I believe these are the zoning amendments, and I don't know if these are the most current, but we have a FAR of not to exceed 0.65, but then we have all of these bonuses that you can't go, brings you up to like 85% of lot coverage. And that's where we're getting our bulk. And I don't know, is this the place in this where we change that? Because that's why we're getting these massive homes on these smaller beach lots. Is that where that's addressed, or do we address it here too?
Yeah, I believe the bonuses are here in these in our residential design guidelines. So this is exactly where to address those. The bonuses are here, not in the zoning code. So
okay.
Yeah. So where they are here, the front porch, the rear alley loaded garage, side loaded garage. Yeah.
They're actually both, Brandy. We've got them.
Oh, thank you, Sean.
Yes. The FARs are in the zoning ordinance as well as in the design guidelines.
But the bonuses?
Oh, the bonuses.
Yeah.
Those are in the zoning ordinance.
It's in the zoning amendment. I pulled them up here. So how do we address that, Randy, specifically?
Well, I think that
I'm sorry, Brandy.
Whatever recommendation you do for the residential design guidelines, if you're not interested in seeing those FAR bonuses, not only would you want to, put that out here now for our discussion for the residential design guidelines, it may be something that when you go to recommend the final draft of the residential design guidelines at the end of this process, that you also, in that motion, ask the city council to amend the zoning code to remove the FAR bonuses that are there, or evaluate those, so that it's clear that it's not just here that it needs to be addressed if there are other locations in the code.
Yeah, because it seems like when we agree upon a 0.65 and then all of a sudden you're at 95, something's gone haywire, 85, something's a tad bit haywire. So for sure we want to address these bonuses. I would like to just get rid of them. And then, okay, so let me see. Okay, the other thing that I was reading, and I'm not exactly sure where I saw this, wherever we see landscaping, we we see surfaces like driveways and patios, and wherever possible, I'd like to see permeable surfaces. So I think that this is a place, where we can deal with the landscaping and we can deal with developmental guidelines that are going to capture water, which is so important right now. Whether it's South Redondo or North Redondo or wherever, every property should be capturing water. And we don't have that. I know in Santa Monica, they do, you have to have a rain barrel, or you have to have a lower area, or you have to have a cistern, or you have to have something. And even when I went through the climate, I'm not sure what you're calling it.
The action plan.
Yeah, the action plan. Lots of encourage. We can try this. We should bring this up. But we're so far behind in the city of Redondo on what we should be doing for drought standards, for the capturing of water, the gray water systems, things like that. So if that's where this is discussed and decided on, that would be wonderful. And I think, I did make a note when you mentioned the cantilevers. You have a picture of it going over a driveway. So of course, this would be where there are no alleyways. And the bulk of it seems so big up front. Is there a way that you could have a cantilever but not have the bulk be so large? So I'm assuming this is so that someone can drive into a rear garage kind of thing, right?
Or a second or third unit, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seemed like the bulk was just massive in those pictures you were showing us rather.
Right. I think that's something we would definitely be testing on your prototypical lots where we're seeing that overhang, where, to just gain the floor area that is felt to be needed. I think we'd want to just revisit that and see. It creates very strange architectural outcomes in some places we've noticed. So maybe limiting how much of the cantilever there is. I think that's part of this massing height bulk test. It's kind of all related.
Right. Do we have any rules on garages underground? I know there's one on Nob Hill and Sapphire, that area right there that's actually quite nice. It goes underground, and then they do 1 floor, 2 floors. Is that, Brandy, is that allowed here in Redondo, like subterranean?
Yeah. Sean, do you want to speak to that a bit?
Yeah, it is allowed. However, there is a slope maximum requirements for driveways. So that limits the depth in one way. They can't be greater in slope than 15%. So there's a point where the lot, can't accommodate, the entire garage, depending on where they're placing it underground.
Yeah, this one, do you know which one I'm talking about? It is literally, the whole thing is underground. I think actually it looks great. I like not having garages in my face. So I think it's really a nice thing. But that's a slope. So something is there. I haven't seen a lot of it, whereas you have a picture in, again, was it in this slideshow, where you have the one on Nob Hill and Gertruda, which is partially under here, right?
Yeah.
Right down at the bottom.
That's a good exhibit. Yeah, it works very well when you have upward sloping lot.
Yeah, so that's partial, but then so the one on that I'm talking about, literally, if you look at the one above that, it's even steeper than that. The garage is probably, maybe it's crazy. I think it might be equal with the sidewalk, but we can do that though, as long as this, okay, I think that's fine. Great. So I like that. And I think that's it.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Hazeltine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Commissioner Barron.
Yes, thank you. Well, I first wanted to start and echo the other commissioners in thanking Lisa, Liz, and Michael for the great work you've done to date and for this very helpful presentation. And I also want to thank Director Forbes and Planning Manager Scully for their leadership in bringing forward and guiding us on this very important issue of updating the residential design guidelines, which really happens in this instance only once every 20 years or so. So thanks to all of you. Lisa, if I may, I'll start with you. I had some questions that I believe you'd be best positioned to answer, if that's okay.
Sure.
Good. What are the timelines between today and the finalization of the residential design guidelines, or RDGs? Kind of what's sort of your step-by-step set of milestones and dates between now and completion? What's left to do and when's it due?
We expect with that community meeting happening in January that in the spring we would be able to have a draft that could be shared. The timeline is actually pretty quick and it's tied to the LEAP grant. I'm also looking at Brandy because my memory is that it's like summer.
Yeah, I think that's what we have for the project. Technically, per the LEAP grant, the project, what the outcome has to be completed. So it would have to be adopted guidelines by December of 2022. But we really are looking to get that done sooner. So contract-wise, we were looking at a shorter time frame than that. So like midsummer, I think.
And Commissioner Barron, another important milestone is our coming back to this commission to say another focus group of folks from the design community, which was really helpful, the Monday discussion we had, and another community workshop, because I think that is going to be a super critical step because we're gathering information now, but the comments on the draft are going to be the most important step to evaluate if the standards are what everybody feels is best for moving forward with.
Okay. So community meeting in January, and that meeting will be advertised to the community by what means?
Lena, do you want to go over that? Because we've done this a lot with several different planning projects, and Lena's going to be getting that notice out.
Okay.
So we do have a list of residents signed up for what we call our e-blast. So it's like a mailing list that you can set up for different topics off of our website. So that we have a mailing list of about 1,300 persons signed up for planning updates. So it'll be an e-blast that goes out to that group regarding the community meeting as well as regarding the survey. Then it will be posted to our city website. We'll post it to the homepage as well as we'll create a separate webpage for the residential design guidelines. Then we're also designing a flyer that will be, it'll be at each of the city hall lobbies as well as the police department and then at the 2 libraries.
And with that flyer, we'll make sure to circulate that to the city council members. We can circulate it to you. So if you have different, groups that you want to communicate that with, that's, we welcome that.
Okay, great. So Lisa, there'll be the community meeting in January, and then in spring, you hope to have a draft. What, if anything, will be done between January and spring? Any other community events, any other milestones?
I think that period, Commissioner Barron, is really going to be our production and testing of certain, of many aspects of the objective standards in order to have produced a comprehensive draft. So it'll really be the work we need to get done, partly because we expect this needs to be more illustrative, more a combination of photographic examples, diagrams, cross sections, but part of it is our testing that based on the comments we're hearing now in terms of what needs to be adjusted in order to get in order to make it easy for people to be engaged in the outreach component and give us some input, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And so after the draft is prepared in the spring, will that draft be circulated to the community, the design community, residents, the planning commission, so that they can provide feedback? And if so, will you have enough time to incorporate that feedback into the RDGs before your midsummer deadline?
We hopefully do. My sense of when we may be ready to go back out, depending on what we're hearing in January and that sort of those months to focus on the production, I would hope would be like in the May timeframe. I mean, that's partly to me, because once we get comments in that period, we definitely would need time to finish it, which would put us in, summer or late summer. It's definitely a push, and part of it is the timeline that the state set.
Okay. And looking at the consulting agreement between you and the city, it says the agreement will continue until June 30th, 2022. All things considered, you believe you're on track to have all services completed by June 30th, 2022, or do you anticipate a need for a potential extension at this point?
There may be a need for a time extension.
Okay.
It'll depend on, as Lisa said, the feedback that we get. If, with the draft, there are things that we need to change with that. When we did the contract, it's, typically the city council will do a year. We've had some that will do an extension with, it may be just to get it to completion, to get it to the city council meeting for that adoption. If it doesn't land, June is a busy time at our council meetings as well with the budget. So if it ends up being a July or August, we just had that recently happen with our vehicle miles traveled sequence regulations updated. And it was just, a couple months of extension for that, but the bulk and the meat of the work will be completed.
Okay, great. And Lisa, at this point, do you have any draft work product on the RDGs, first drafts, notes of intents or priorities, anything?
Not right now, partly because this step of gathering the input is going to shape what we start writing, what we start testing. So, this is kind of step 2 of outreach. Monday was the focus group. And then January is the community input and the processing of the survey information. So I'd say we haven't started because we're trying to get a feel of what direction some of the standards need to take.
Okay. And I may have missed it in the beginning. And if I did, I apologize. And it may have been in the agenda packet. Have you or anyone on your staff ever prepared or updated RGGs, residential design guidelines, prior to this engagement?
For myself, and actually, Michael, do you mind, is it possible to stop screen sharing? Is that okay for the commissioners? Because all of a sudden everybody was very tiny, and I know that slide was up there. Thanks, because we're in a conversation mode. Thank you, Michael. I've done guidelines that include the residential design guidelines for the city of Long Beach, kind of in the downtown area. Having worked in a number of cities, some that are in city of Glendale documents. The objective design standards really have not been, I've been searching around with peer groups, and because the requirement is so new, there are little to no examples of adopted ones. But in terms of guidelines, CityWorks Design has done a number of different ones that are a range of things, multifamily. And so, we definitely have experience in writing guidelines for cities.
Okay, well, good.
And,
go ahead. Oh, Liz, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add that I have had a lot of experience particularly as a planner within the city at the City of Santa Monica, and actually also in the City of West Hollywood, where I worked prior to that, writing standards, code standards, design standards, and so yeah.
Okay, good. Are there recent examples from other cities who've updated their RDGs to be objective and compliant with recent state law that you had an opportunity to review?
We have started to look, and I've definitely been asking around and have not found adopted ones yet. We're continuing to search because it's a really good step for a lessons learned to look at what they are looking like. And again, it's not to say, hey, those are going to work here in Redondo Beach. A lot of it is how they're structuring it to be used. For instance, I'm seeing some, they haven't been adopted yet, which are giving lists of options and saying, pick 2 of the following or comply with 6 of the following from this list to do things like control style. It's a very kind of new way because many, many guidelines across the state are more of the, the shoulds than the shalls. So I think that's one of the challenges is we are out on the cutting edge, and all cities are that are doing theirs right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, Lisa, Scott, you and I had that conversation, and Lisa was doing some search. I think we have one example. Now it's just on the multifamily mixed use. It was the Temecula one.
Mm-hmm.
I can forward that around and circulate that. It's not going to be exactly, but, to that point, it's still draft. It was for their public hearing on December 1st of this year. So at that same time that we were doing the RFPs for this, with so many doing housing elements, we were utilizing examples of other requests for proposals because so many were out there trying to get this done. So I think everybody's kind of on the same track right now.
Okay. Thank you. And then Liz, I think you may have mentioned that in reference to the use of a scorecard system, that it's been successful in other jurisdictions. Was the scorecard?
Did you want an example? Is that what you're?
Well, it's good to know that it's been successful in other jurisdictions. Was it the scorecard system used in connection with RDGs or something else?
Well, actually, one that I was involved in developing years ago in the city of West Hollywood, for example, was for landscaping, and gave the applicant an opportunity to put in the kind of landscaping that they want to add. And this also had to do with the permeable surfaces that the commissioner asked about earlier. And that scorecard or process or point system is actually still in use in their code. So that was in 2001 that I was involved in adopting that. So that's an example of where that can be very successful, and it's worked very well. So
good to hear. That's good to know. Do you recall if there had been any challenges to the use of a scorecard system, either administratively or through litigation in West Hollywood when you were there or otherwise?
No, I mean, I have actually asked planners, in more recent years, how does that seem to work? And they've said it works really well. I don't think it gets challenged because it's very easy to show compliance. So, yeah.
Okay, good to know. In the consulting agreement, that there's a requirement that CityWorks secure a Redondo Beach business license. Do you know, Lisa or Planning Manager Scully, whether that's happened yet or if it's in process?
Yes, it has.
Go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
Yes, sorry, Lisa. Yes, it has happened. They do have a city business license.
Okay, great. Quick question if I may, for Director Forbes. So is it anticipated that the updated RDG will result or require amendments to the municipal code?
I think at a minimum, it'll require the amendment that I think it was Liz that might have mentioned it. Just, instead of it being the intent of the residential design guidelines, that it's the residential design guidelines that need to be complied with. So I think at a minimum, those zoning code changes would need to be made to just make sure that it's clear. It's not just the intent or purpose. Somebody could say, oh, well, the purpose says this. It doesn't mean we had to do all the rest of it. So we want to make sure that it's clearly a part of that. And that's an ordinance process. It goes to that. It might take a little bit longer for the process for adoption to happen, even though the standards may be drafted already and ready to go. And they can be adopted and then concurrently adopting the ordinance update, just so it's incredibly clear that it's not just the intent, it's the full residential design guidelines.
Okay.
If I may, Brandy, too, as well, depending on the level of specificity of the standards, wherever they're in conflict with our municipal code, we'll have to go through and reconcile that as
right.
well.
Okay. And Lisa, when you have a draft, perhaps in the spring, that you'll propose to the Planning Commission, perhaps, will it be take it or leave it, or will we have an opportunity as the Planning Commission and individual commissioners to provide further input at that time, such that you'll still have an opportunity to incorporate those comments? Or again, will it kind of be take it or leave it? Here's what we got.
The commission's comments are really critical to the process. So I wouldn't expect to bring to you something that was completed without changes at all. That isn't really in line with our philosophical way to practice.
Sure. Good. Yeah, and you believe you'll have enough float in your schedule to incorporate those comments before any deadline to finalize the residential design guidelines?
I mean, absolutely. We're going to do our very best to meet the deadlines which are imposed and to integrate all of the comments in a way that makes sense, that these guidelines really align with where the city wants them to go. And I mean the community of Redondo Beach.
Okay. The commissioners had raised tonight, as you have, the issue of fitting well in Redondo Beach and maintaining the character of Redondo Beach. For purposes of your development of the RDGs, what does that mean, and how will you make that determination?
That's an excellent question. I think we are hoping to hear more from, what we're hearing tonight from the commission, what we can glean from the survey, and try and take a stab at how it might be defined in the guidelines. And we don't have any assumptions right now, Liz and Michael and I, as to what that will say. I think we're trying to get a handle on what can it be pinned down in any way? And is it one that acknowledges this evolution? It just seems like the city is in a really important place where you're seeing neighborhoods that are kind of half the past and half the future, right? Or some combination.
And half the middle that instigated the initial residential design guidelines.
And that's not uncommon. I think what we're trying to ascertain is what does Redondo Beach want to see in the future? And if the character it's really a character of continued evolution and an understanding that, at least with the current trend, that the projects will be pretty, let's just say maximizing whatever the envelope is that will be defined. That may be the case, and the guidelines will reflect that. So
Okay. And do you anticipate that the guidelines will include an objective statement as to what it means to fit well in Redondo Beach and or maintain the character?
I think it would be important to convey, I mean, what's tricky is the objective part of it, right? I mean, this is at the core of it. So it may be an opening statement to be able to articulate sort of the essence of what the city feels is important, or what is essentially Redondo Beach. That's how I would say it. What is essentially Redondo Beach? But when it comes down to it, it'll be what is in the objective residential design standards that applicants and staff, as you go back to Liz's part of it, can objectively measure, checklist, whichever component, scorecard, whichever component is elected. And it's probably going to be a combination because each topics are going to vary as to which measurement is going to be more logical to be applied. There was the example of the landscape in the scorecard, but
yeah.
If I may, Lisa, too, I might be able to add something here, Commissioner. And I'm looking to a couple of our commissioners that serve on our General Plan Advisory Committee. We've done a lot of, and this is something, this line of dialogue that we're going through now is really getting the juices flowing, which is exactly what we want. And Commissioner Lamb and Commissioner Gaddis know very well, we've gone through a pretty extensive exercise to try to define the city's character with guidelines and a vision statement. And I think we need to get that to Lisa and her team and kind of articulate some of those, those statements that came from multiple meetings, a lot of discussion with that, with the GPAC. So I appreciate everything you're bringing up.
Oh, good. Great. I'm so happy to hear that you and other commissioners are involved in that process and are involved here. I think that's important. So thank you. On that point, if you know Manager Scully or perhaps Director Forbes, is City Attorney Michael Webb expected to be involved in the review of the any portion of the guidelines to ensure that they are objective and in compliance with applicable law to reduce the likelihood of a legal challenge that could undermine all of the hard work we're doing now?
We'll make sure that they're involved with that. In that review, when those are adopted, it's going to need to have that. So we'll make sure that when we have that draft, that we'll also circulate it to the city attorney's office. Just they're likely going to wait until after the next round of feedback, because if we have additional changes, but they'll want to review what's as close to final as possible, and then they would point out anything that they felt is not meeting that, and so we may have to make some tweaks related to that. But it is adopted by resolution, so they have to have they have a resolution that they have to approve, and part of that is the attachment, the exhibits.
Okay. Lisa, another question, if I may. Redondo Beach has a highly experienced, thoughtful, and engaged community of designers, architects, subdivision consultants, home builders, and others with knowledge and interest in providing input to these guidelines. And I commend you and your staff and our staff for arranging a community meeting I recently held with them. So thank you for that. If I may ask, what were some of the key points expressed by what I'll refer to as the design community with respect to the guidelines? What were their concerns? If you think this is the appropriate forum to discuss that.
Sure. And there were definitely comments on height. There were comments on massing in bulk. There were comments on how the garage is faced. There were comments about open space. There were comments about style. There were comments about character. There were comments about how do you do this and still allow flexibility to the design community, i.e. architects. And the comments were helpful in that some of them were pretty specific. There were a lot of comments that were really clear of what they felt wasn't working in the current standards or guidelines that they wanted revisited. And it was very productive. I mean, we found it very helpful because this is really the first line of the community who's going to be testing the objective residential design standards. So we're definitely looking forward to hearing from them again. We have a draft for them to chew on.
Okay. And it sounds like you are taking into consideration those comments and input from them, from the design community.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And Commissioner Barron, if I might just say also this evening there are a number from the design community signed up for public comment.
Oh, okay. Well, good. And Lisa, are there any notes or meeting minutes from the meeting with the design community? And if so, is that something you're able to share with the Planning Commission at this time?
They're not ready to share. We've definitely drafted some notes, but I would say they're not ready for the commission because they're draft. I think as a commission, we owe you notes that have been reviewed carefully, spell checked, formatted, and are worthy of commission review. So those are definitely notes that can be finalized and we can provide to Sean and Brandy, which would be the proper way to route them to the commission, if I could just suggest.
Yes.
Okay. All right. A couple other items very quickly, and I appreciate your patience with me and everybody for that matter. In the 2003 RDG, there are specific call outs for specific neighborhoods, the avenues and barrel heights, and there's reasons to do that. Lisa, in the RDGs that you're working on now, will you consider the character and community of other specific parts of Redondo Beach, including District 5 and its sub areas, as part of this process?
Right now, we are expecting to look at other neighborhoods. But again, we haven't literally started drafting anything yet. So.
And here is the opportunity for you as commissioners, if there are certain areas where you're concerned about, I think that there was the point of the, Dow Johnson, right? Like we need to make sure that we're, looking at certain particular areas and looking at what feedback we'll end up getting on those. So if there's, and we had the map that showed kind of some different neighborhoods that have been, specified over time historically in Redondo Beach. But if there's anything in particular that you want to make sure that we're paying attention to, please let us know.
Okay. And the way to pass those comments along would be tonight, as well as through emails to you, Brandy, or directly?
Tonight, I would say as a commission, as a whole, that this is, because you as commissioners are all hearing it. And as Commissioner Hensley had said at the beginning, do we vote on it? And I said, well, just more of if anybody heard something tonight and they're like, you know what, I don't agree with that, I think you need to make sure you say that so that we understand that it's not a comprehensive feel from the whole commission. If you send something individually, remember that that's just you as an individual commissioner. It's not the full commissions, because you haven't, we don't know if somebody else may or may not agree with that.
Okay. And will we have an opportunity after this meeting at a subsequent meeting, either before or at the time of the spring draft, to make?
I think this is it. I think this is your opportunity to really, start giving us, if there are certain, that was one of the questions is, what are the additional things you want to make sure that we're addressing?
Okay, and that's something, those recommendations and directions, concerns is something that we as a commission would have to put forward tonight in the form of a motion, or how would that happen?
It doesn't need to be in the form of a motion. I think that if, we can go through what, different comments that have been made. If there's anything that you've heard somebody else say, you're like, you know what, I don't agree with that, but everything else that's been said tonight, I think that we should be just, investigating. We'll do that.
Okay. Back to Lisa, if I may. Is it the intent of the RDGs in any way to solve the housing shortage?
I don't think directly. I should let staff answer that. I mean,
I don't think the intent of them is to address the design shortage. It's more, this is what we are expecting of what is constructed. The reason that there was the statewide, the issue of statewide concern with housing shortage was mentioned in the presentation was because that has driven the legislation that has required us to have objective standards. And that's where we're at today, is making sure that these are objective standards. It wasn't so that we're meeting that housing demand per se with the residential design guidelines.
Yeah, and if I may, the real intention behind the state creating these requirements for objective development standards is so that they're laid out very clearly and the development review process can happen more quickly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a, indirect, it makes it simpler to move through the process more quickly.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll have a lot of back and forth between staff and designers because they feel that they're meeting that residential design guideline. We're feeling like they're not meeting it. And it's just because it's so subjective that it keeps going back and forth. Takes a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Lisa, if I may, as part of your outreach to the Redondo Beach community, will you be polling or getting feedback as to whether Redondo Beach residents want to limit the size of homes or indoor living space or mezzanines or any other concerns that have been raised tonight?
yes.
All right. And Lena, if I may ask you a question about the outreach efforts for Redondo Beach residents. Is there any way to expand in an economically feasible manner the outreach to the Redondo Beach community to engage them on this issue? And I imagine, that's something that's been considered for other items as well, but something beyond the 1,300 people who have signed up on the list and the other good efforts that you're making. Is there anything else that you would recommend be done to expand the outreach to get more people involved in this very important topic?
Certainly, we do have the social media sites for our general plan update. So if we get permission to also share these other efforts, that's sort of outside the general plan and the social media